Hey guys, Captain Blade J52 here, and you folks typically know me here on Pilot Review Show as the Crazy Camera Guy. Whenever you see something on stream or on YouTube, it's typically shot from my point of view, unless Boss Man or one of the other hosts has taken over streaming duties for the evening, or we have a special event of some type going on. Now, about 2 weeks ago, at the time of recording this little blurb, we attempted to shoot episode 152 for you guys. And during the course of the episode, we experienced some technical difficulties where the TeamSpeak server we broadcast from actually crashed. Now, this also caused my local recording software to crash as well during the time. And so far, I've been unable to recover the first half of the episode for you guys. And in trying to recover the lost footage, as well as a couple of real-life things, I had fallen slightly behind in getting our local recordings uploaded for you folks. Now, this will have been corrected by the time you guys actually hear this, and if I manage to recover the missing footage, I'll redo this episode in the future for you guys and whatnot. We typically do a local recording because it's much easier on my internet than strictly streaming to YouTube and to Twitch at the same time. At the moment, it's just not something my internet and computer can handle. So that's why we've been doing local recordings for you guys for a while. Now, hopefully in the very near future and everything, I'll have a better upgraded computer than what I do now, and some of those issues will have been taken care of finally for you folks. But for now, guys, I wanted to clear my backlog of footage, get us back on schedule for you folks, and for now, enjoy the shenanigans that occurred after we managed to finally recover from the crash. Alrighty folks, sorry about that. We had a slight issue with the TeamSpeak server and everything, so we couldn't really communicate, but we're back up and running. I'll try to edit out some of that in post-production for when this goes up on YouTube, but
where'd we leave off?
Yeah, we'll just last thing I remember yakking about was basically the console and stuff for the ship.
Right.
Basically, I remember saying basically, if you're looking for a phaser build, then this is a good console you're going to want to consider. Everything is it gives a hefty boost to phasers, the nice chunk of crit severity along with it. Now, I realize a lot of people aren't going to be able to afford how much this usually goes for on the exchange, but if you're able to scrape it up, if you're lucky enough to drop a pack, you're not going to be disappointed, I don't think. But, moving along to our patch notes. Now, there's a decent chunk of stuff here. Everything. The big one was implementing our Peril over Pavo event. We also have our Crossfield coming in. They also fixed the nacelles associated with some of the ships. Let's see, what's the other big one? Resolve some performance issues with the UI. Now, I want to get your thoughts on some of this already before I go over mine.
For it.
But, well, anyway, as far as the patch note, as far as the patch note I wanted to go over, I want to get your thoughts on everything first. What is the thing that stands out to you, good sir?
It's actually something I was pointed out by a friend before I realized what was going on. The Terran Gorilla combat armor, just by the name, you may not recognize it at all. But watching Discovery, if you remember what Captain Lorca wears in the Mirror Universe and the fight off everything, to do off, all that stuff. You would basically the Terran Gorilla combat armor is his outfit. The armor is that outfit. So it turned from, oh yeah, we get something cool, we get a lot of lithium, and now you get Lorca's outfit. We get Lorca's outfit. We need to jump into this, guys. But that was it from me. That was the only thing I thought I didn't even realize, and I'm pretty sure not many other people did, or maybe they did. They did realize. Who knows? So that was it for me. Yeah.
Alrighty then. Now, the big one that I wanted to talk about was one that people were saying, and it's the change they made to NPC scaling. It says, reduce the base damage tables used by all space NPCs, hostile and friendly. This change will affect only NPCs at level 55 and above, and works out to a 15% reduction to base damage output at level 60, and approximately a 19% reduction at 65. And it reduced the damage scaler applied to all Dreadnought rank NPCs, hostile and friendly, by 10%. Now, a lot of folks were seeing this and they're thinking, oh my gosh, this is just going to be a huge straight nerf across the board, and they're lowering the bar big time. Well, the way Borticus explained it on the stream is at level, around that level area, is the enemies scale up a bit sharper than they had in previous levels. And in all honesty, from hearing his explanation, you can go back and check that out on their stream, and from what we have here in the notes, it's not really going to amount to as much as people are thinking. It's basically a small Category 1 nerf, and it basically amounts to taking half of a tactical console off of a ship, is essentially what this amounts to, both for hostile and friendly units. So it's not going to be that big of a deal. Most likely, you're probably not going to feel it that much, especially if you're at the higher end of gear. And the way he explained it is essentially like the highest that they could hit you for previously, or the lowest they could hit you for previously, is like the highest they can hit you for now. So it is a slight nerf, yes, but it's not going to be one that's, oh my god, they've lowered the bar to the floor,
Yeah.
type of
In
level.
this case, I feel like it's more of how there was always a group of people that were always AFK penaltied due to the people on the very high end. Then you had the guys from the very high end, and then a very small section of people on the average that are able to help and just above being kicked for AFK. I feel with this nerf, as we're gonna, some people are gonna call it, actually expands that average pool quite a bit to include a lot of the people that usually get AFK penalty. So they actually have, they may actually have good builds and whatnot. They may actually be able to participate. But the mission over before one of those guys just load in, if that makes sense. And the people on the high end actually are brought into the average group, I feel like. So it's not, so you have to have this super duper build to stay in this very weird high end, but then that's too high and it's too much of a weird grind to even care for. The average is now a quite larger field, I feel like.
It is going to let people survive a little bit longer, which is good. So I'm not going to complain as a tank, because, yes, please. But, like I say, basically the best comparison I can give, if any of y'all are familiar with the stat squish that World of Warcraft did several years ago, it was basically, you would get to some of the expansions, the scale would go up really sharp, then up sharper again for the next expansion, and it basically just made it one curve, so to speak, or one steady scaling line, is the way Borticus explained it. And it makes it more of an even scaling instead of just like a really sharp rise, so to speak. So basically, like I'm saying, all this is going to be is tantamount to them essentially removing a tactical console from the NPC ships. It's really all it's going to be. Probably not going to feel it, and if you do feel it, then it's basically them handing you a buff, so to speak. But that's really some of the biggest stuff that we have in here as far as this goes. We had this slight little nerf that they were talking about, and most of it's introducing our events and slight little bug fixes. But yeah, that's what we've got for our articles this evening. Now, coming into our budget build is actually a request from a guy that was in our armada, and he wanted to use the Damar Science Dreadnought. However, he wasn't really sure what way he wanted to take it. He wanted to be able to take advantage of his science powers, but he also wanted to be able to fall back on his traditional weapons if the situation demanded it. So the question became, what did we give him? What could he possibly do in order to achieve this goal? So for this particular build, we did a 1-key budget. Now a 1-key budget is pretty much the same thing as our bare bones builds with slightly different parameters. Now for our bare bones budgets, we typically assume a budget of 2 million EC and everything else is free or cheap as possible. Now for our 1-key budgets, we assume that somehow somebody has gotten a hold of a lockbox key and they've sold it, and that's what they're using to fund the build. Now for this particular ship, because it's a science dread, it has 7 weapons, it's a 4-3 layout, does have access to a secondary deflector. The console layout for this particular ship, it's 3 engineering, 5 science, 3 tactical, and it does come with a hangar bay. Now because we can get him a lot of good stuff on the cheap, we had him go down the Polaron route. And you can, like I said, you can get a lot of good stuff with this. Now on the forward part of the ship, you have the chronometric beam array, which is the Polaron beam. That's going to let him zap the enemy shields a little bit. We have our morphogenic energy torpedo. This is a Polaron energy torpedo. Basically, it functions like a torpedo, it fires like a torpedo, it acts like a torpedo, but it's actually doing Polaron energy damage. And the good thing about this is it will benefit from projectile boosting benefits as well as energy boosting benefits, so it gets to double dip just a little bit. Then we have our Thoron-infused Polaron beam that's going to do a little radiation damage. In addition to that, we have his advanced Piezo Polaron beam, which is going to grant a bit of healing to the ship based off of the weapon proc. In the aft section of the ship, we have the heavy chronometric Polaron turret, and then we have our morphogenic Polaron Omni turret. I call it an Omni turret because it can function as either an Omni beam or a turret depending on which type of firing mode you activate in order to use it. And then for our final rear weapon, we have the Dominion Polaron beam array, one of those. Now that's marked down as a 12, it should actually be an 11. Slight little mistake there of mine. But we'll take a look at some of our set bonuses in just a minute and explain why we did what we did with the weapons here, because I know a lot of people are going to be wondering, you know, why did you not just use another Omni? You know, why are you using the turret? And we'll discuss that in a minute or two. Now for our shields, our engines, deflector, and warp core, now we had to, or we wanted to kind of give him something towards the middle of the road. We wanted to make sure he had good defensive value, ways to take advantage of his science powers, while also having a bit of power to his weapons and everything. Now for his deflector, engines, and shields, we went with 3 pieces of the Solanae Dyson set, or the Solanae stuff. This comes from the Step Between Stars mission, I believe it is. It's going to give him a lot of nice science stats to play with, as well as some pretty decent survivability. And the Solanae set itself is actually pretty decent at survival. It's not one I would consider the greatest, but it'll keep him in the game pretty good. Now his secondary deflector is one that was purchased from his fleet lab. This is one that's going to give some EPG and control expertise. Now this does assume slightly re-rolled stats and what he would ultimately want to go for, but he could pick that up from his lab for cheap. Now since he won't have access to the Solanae core, since he does not have the original Dyson Destroyer that they gave us as an anniversary event several years ago, he's going to have to source a warp core out. In this instance, once again, we're calling on the Temporal Phase Overcharged core, because in our opinion, this is a core that is very hard to beat at the budget level. I can't talk now, apparently, after the server took a dump. And the real strength to this warp core is the Temporal Negotiator style effect that it gets as its capacitor. Basically, whenever you throw the capacitor on this warp core, it's going to cut your bridge officer cooldowns in half for the duration that it's active. So that's a very big thing there. That's going to give free cooldowns whenever you need it. Now, for the devices, there's 3 device slots on the ship. We typically like to think of those as personal preference. However, one device we do like to recommend because it's cheap and easy to pick up is the Subspace Field Modulator from the Skirmish mission. Now, this particular device, it will give you a free Neutronium alloy armor's worth of resistances while it's active. Now, it does, as well as some extra defense, now it does debuff you for a minus 400 protonic damage resistance rating. Now, not too many enemies use protonic damage in the game, but there are a few that do, and there are a few sources of protonic damage out there, so it is something to be made aware of. Now, as far as the consoles on the ship go, these are where it gets kind of interesting. This is where we tie some of our set bonuses together, and where we kind of balance the ship out, I guess, a bit more is the words I'm looking for. Now, for his engineering consoles, we gave him a Trillium D plating from the Ragnarok mission. That's going to give a bit of defensive value as well as shield capacity. So it's basically a Neutronium alloy armor and a field generator slammed into one thing. Now, we also have our Martok console, which is another great one. I'll show just a couple of the stats here. So this is going to give you a bit of maximum hit points. It's going to give him a bit of shield and engine power, a bit of shield capacity, and a bit of flight turn rate, which is going to be nice on a ship like that because they tend to not have the best turn rates ever. At least that's been my experience with them. Now the next thing we have is our Reinforced Armaments console. This comes from the Beyond the Nexus mission. This is going to be really great because this is going to give a nice chunk of EPS, which is going to allow him to transfer his power around a lot quicker. This is going to allow him to also regenerate that power whenever he needs to. Now, as far as science consoles go, we kind of wanted to go sort of middle of the road here, I guess is the word I'm looking for. We wanted to give him decent power with his science abilities, but also not gimp him in other areas. Now, for this, we have the Temporal Disentanglement Suite. This comes from the Butterfly mission. Now, this is going to give a nice chunk of shield capacity, as well as a bit of shield damage resistance, and also a nice chunk of critical chance and severity based on the amount of aux power that he's going to have. So it gives defensive value and offensive value, which is always great to have in a console. Now, we're using a Delphic Tear generator here, which would normally blow our budget out of the water. However, the player made clear he already had one of these to use. So in this case, we're assuming that the user already had access to this particular console. Now, what makes this one so nasty is the huge buff that it's going to give to exotic damage. It's I want to think it's 25% buff, somewhere around in there, between 20 to 30% buff. So, very potent console. The attack that it gives is also fairly nasty as well, and can tear a group of enemies apart if the cards are played right. The next thing we have is our Temporally Shielded Data Core. Now, what's going to be good about this is it's going to give a bit of physical damage resistance. It's also going to give a bit of kinetic damage resistance, but most of all, it's going to boost his EPG a bit, and it's also going to give some control expertise. So that's going to improve things like his gravity wells and similar types of powers. Now we have our piezoelectric focuser here, which is going to buff his polarons. It's going to give a little bit of turn rate, a little bit of shield cap. So overall, a very nice boosting console to have. Then the last console he has for his science is a restorative particle focuser, which whenever he uses a heal, based on the last tick of that heal, it's going to pop an exotic damage boost. Now, because he's using a lot of science powers and a lot of zero distance abilities, he's going to be generating a lot more threat than normal, and the assumption behind this is he's going to benefit more because he's probably going to have to pop a few heals occasionally than he would otherwise benefit from the straight exotic consoles. Then for his tactical consoles, to round it out, we have the Chronometric Capacitor, which is going to make our 3-piece chronometric set, our morphogenic controller, which is going to make 3-piece morphogenic, and then we have a directed energy distribution manifold for general plus beam damage, since there's not a dedicated budget drop of the Polaron consoles yet. Now, I left the hangar bay blank because I don't like assuming what types of pets people enjoy using. Some people find certain pets more effective than others, and I also don't like to assume what he's going to have access to in terms of pets. So I usually consider pets personal preference. Now, getting into some of our set bonuses here, and the reason we used the heavy chronometric turret instead of the Omni. Now, in a nutshell, the chronometric Omni beam and the morphogenic Omni turret actually share a lockout with each other, which sucks major butt. But it is what it is. So in order to kind of get around that lockout to still help him benefit from the chronometric 3-piece, we had to go with the turret. Now, getting into his chronometric items, why might he want these? Now, these numbers are going to be slightly distorted because we are on the ground, so that's where we're reading them from. Now, the 2-set bonus isn't the greatest thing to write home about, but it's going to give free aux power, and a slight bit of a bonus as he's at lower aux power settings, so it's something to have. The real strength here is in the 3-piece. It's a 2-minute recharge. It's going to give a pretty nice chunk of exotic damage as well as energy damage for 15 seconds. So those numbers would actually be a bit higher in space, closer to the 20% on each level type of thing. So he's going to get a fair boost in this case. And because it gives exotic and energy damage, that's why we wanted him to be able to have that. Now, for his morphogenic items, I'll pull this up here on my own ship. Now, his morphogenic for his 2-piece is going to be a straight cooldown reduction to fire at will, beam overload, scatter volley, rapid fire, torp spread, torp high yield, and the mine dispersal patterns. So basically, any of your tactical enhancements are going to get a slight cooldown reduction here. Now, depending on which type of tactical enhancement you activate, you're also going to get a buff if you're using the 3-piece bonus. If you activate Thaw or Beam Overload, you're going to get a 2% critical chance boost up to a maximum of 6%. Then if you activate Scatter Volley or Rapid Fire, you're going to get a 10% crit severity boost up to a maximum of 30%. And then if you get a Torpedo Spread or a Torp High Yield or one of the Mine Patterns, you're going to have a 7.5% Cat 1 weapon boost up to 22.5%. So almost to a tactical console for free in that aspect. Then for some of the other set bonuses that we're going to be looking at here, let's see, I think we had the Solanae. Getting slightly ahead of myself a little bit. Now, he's going to get a bit of extra shield power, and he's also going to get the Structural Integrity Leech, which is something fairly decent that he can get. Grants all of your energy weapon attacks a 2.5% chance to repair 100% of the damage they deal, and it is slightly capped, can only trigger once per second, but it's potentially additional healing that he's going to benefit from on the ship. So it's kind of a balanced approach is what we were going for here. Hopefully you guys can see what we're trying to do. Now, as far as our skill setup, this is the standard build that we usually recommend here on the show. It's a balanced approach that should let anybody adapt to any given situation. And for those people that want to just copy a build down, you can see our lieutenant points and lieutenant commander. And for everybody that wants to know the technical stuff of why we picked the skills that we did, we'll have a video for you guys that you can check that out with. And we have our commander tier points, captain tiered points, and admiral tiered points. Now, I will mention very briefly that the cooldown reductions built into the ship will also stack on top of the cooldown reductions that he has in his skill tree. Now, because he wanted to go for more sciencey damage while still being able to fall back on his weapons, we gave him Temporal Operative primary and Strategist secondary to kind of play off of each other a little bit. For his traits in this instance, we have the Beam Barrage for free beam damage, Elusive for free defensive value, Point Blank Shot from House Peg for a Cat 2 buff depending on how close he is to the target, Nanite Repair Matrix for a free little heal whenever he needs it, the Fleet Coordinator, which is going to give a bit of a damage increase based on how many people are in your party, 2% minimum, and up to a 10% maximum. His Photonic Capacitor, which is one of the science-specific traits. If you're not a science captain, but you would like to use this build, swap in your own career-specific trait, and you're good to go. Then we have the Redirected Armor Plating from the Renegade's Regret mission. Whenever you're shot from behind or in the sides, he gets a damage decrease, or damage resistance. Particle Manipulator for our R&D crafting trait. We always like to assume you've leveled at least one crafting skill, and in this case we've assumed he's chosen beams. So it's going to give a bit of a boost to his EPG as crit chance on his exotic damage. Then to round it out, we have our Astrophysicist, which is going to be a slight boost to our particle generators, flow caps, and our sensor stats. For Starship traits, we have Best Defense, Hull Healing buff to attack patterns along with normal effects, Unconventional Tactics from the Strategist, which is going to give a damage increase for the short time it's active. And then because he's a Federation captain, one of our money traits, we have the Honored Dead, which is going to be a nice damage reduction and is worth at least 10% across the board to his ship. If you're a Federation player, or if you're not a Fed player, I did include something in the notes for alternatives. For his space reputations, we went with the Advanced Target Systems for free severity, Energy Refrequencer to help heal the ship a little bit. We went with Precision for the free critical hit chance, and then finally the the Enhanced Sensors, which will enhance the effectiveness of drain control powers whenever you activate a Captain Power, and activating subsequent Captain Powers in a row will simply refresh the duration. For active reps, we have the Anti-Time Entanglement Singularity, nice little AoE physical damage and kick in the pants to foes. We have our Biomolecular Shield Generator, which is going to reduce damage that they take to the shields while they're inside of it, as well as healing the shields a bit. Deploy Sensor Interference Platform, which is a nice little "oh crap, I'm about to die" button. You could pop this and it will spawn a little sensor platform that will taunt foes to itself until it's either destroyed or the duration runs out, whichever of those two things happen first. Finally, we have our Quantum Singularity Manipulation. Now, to get a good bang for your buck out of this, because it increases your science stats dramatically, pop some of your exotic buffs first, throw down, or get ready to throw down a gravity well, hit your Quantum Manipulation, and drop your anti-time on top of them. You get a lot more damage out of it that way. Now for our bridge officers, what we have here is the... see here we have an Ensign Universal / Intel, Lieutenant Commander TAC, Lieutenant Engineering. We have a Commander Science / Intel, and then a Lieutenant Commander Science seat. Now for our Ensign Universal, we made this a Torp spread to take advantage of the torpedo. For Lieutenant Commander Tactical, we have a Tactical Team 1 to redirect the shields and purge boarding parties, Beta to debuff the enemies, Thaw 3 to disrupt foes and smack them with a beam as long as they're in range. We have our Lieutenant Engineering, which is going to be our Emergency to Weapons 1, which is going to be very, very nice, and buffs our weapons powers, as well as giving a slight buff to our weapon damage. Then we have Reverse Shield Polarity, which is going to recharge our shields in a pinch off of incoming damage. Then, for our Commander Science / Intel, We have Hazard Emitters 1. It's going to purge things like Borg Plasma Fires as well as healing us over time. We have our DRB, Destabilizing Resonance Beam, which comes from a story mission. It's going to be a nice little AoE debuff and physical damage to foes. Then we have our Ionic Turbulence, if I could words, which is going to debuff foes using intelligence. Then we also have our Gravity Well 3 to help group foes up, as well as dealing exotic damage. For our Lieutenant Commander Science, we have our Science Team, which is going to recharge our shields a little bit, as well as purge subnucleonic-based effects. Then we have our Charged Particle Burst, which is going to help zap some of the shields of the enemy a little bit. Then we also have our Subspace Vortex 3, which is our money power that we picked up. This comes from the exchange or from the lockbox, and that's going to round out our ship powers. Now, overall, we're looking at about, I broke it down as far as reps go, we're looking at about 32,000 dill if you're at tier 6, about 54,000 if not. Now, you're looking at between 4 to 7 days build time, depending on whether or not you have tier 6 reps. And we're looking at, as far as our total EC spent, we're looking at about 3.3 million. Our total budget we could have spent was 4.1. So a little bit of EC left in the bank as far as this goes. Now, one thing I did want to note is normally we would have an engineering team on here. However, in this case, we felt that there was enough innate healing in the ship that we could sacrifice the engineering team to pick up some powers elsewhere. Now, what about you, good sir? Any comments on our ship here?
None specific, really. Just recommendations for, like, say, the devices in the hangar. There's some devices that will prove useful, like, you know, obviously the subspace field modulator, that's a good one for some damage resistance. But there is the deuterium surplus that you can get, as well as armor catalyst. The armor catalyst is a good, it's a little bit better than the hull patch because it also gives you temporary hit points along with healing your current hit points. And the deuterium surplus gives you extra movement speed if you're actually going too slow while in combat, as well as boosting up your defense. While for hangar,
exotic particle floods.
While for hangar, I guess you could go with the Cardassian hangar pet, the
Hidekis.
Yeah. Well, they're not Hidekis, but they are. But yeah, it's those. I would actually recommend the Delta Flyers for tachyon beams.
That would be another good one here, actually,
but,
yes.
Yeah, that's what I would recommend. Besides that, I have no questions. This is actually a really nice build for what was the setup and everything. And actually quite like the addition with the morphogenic Polaron energy torpedo. That was a nice boost, I have to say.
Yep. The idea we wanted to give him was, because we have the chronometric on there, we wanted that for his exotic buffs, obviously. We wanted that for his energy damage. That's a very nice thing. Ordinarily, we wouldn't mix a turret together, like a dedicated turret in like this. But since he's going mostly science anyway, while still being able to fall back on weapons, we felt it was warranted.
Oh, yeah.
So, hopefully our guy out there sees this. He's able to adapt pretty much what he needs from it. And hopefully it does pretty good for him. But, anyways, that's what we've got for a budget build this week. Now, not really a lot going on in the bugs front. At least anything really major, just your basic glitches and everything. One I do want to talk about very briefly, and this is one involving the new Pavo ground armor for some people that may already have it. If you're somebody that already has the Gorilla armor, now I've been told that that's not reclaimable. For some odd reason, some people aren't being able to reclaim it. If you're actually seeing that bug, do let me know. Be sure to let them know, because they'll want to fix that as quick as they can and see how widespread it actually is. And the more people that report it, the bigger case sample they have, and that they'll be able to hopefully determine a cause a lot quicker. But that's the biggest thing I have on the bugs front at the moment. Not really anything else major going on, aside from the usual visual glitches and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But yeah. Anyways, that's what we've got for a show this week for you guys. I do apologize for the interruption earlier. I don't know what happened to the TeamSpeak. It decided to take a poop on me. I do apologize for that. But on our way out, a shout out to our good friends over at the Temporal Armada. Be sure to check them out. They've usually got a good program going on. Also, a shout out to our other good friends over at the Kurtang Pirate Radio. The party is there. They always have some good music going. A lot of variety. Gotta give them credit on that. But if you guys have any requests for the Budget Build Corner, feel free to let us know. We do take requests, as you guys can see. This actually came about as a request from a user this evening. You know, let us know, hey, this is the kind of budget I've got to work with. You know, this is the ship I'm wanting. This is what I want to do. I want to be a tank, or I want to be a damage dealer, or I want to be a space wizard. Or you kind of want to go towards the middle of the spectrum, maybe. Let us know if you've got any special conditions. Like in this case, he had the Delphic Terror console he wanted to use. Within reason, of course. Then, if you think you're gearing your setup are in order, and it's your piloting that needs a little bit of work, get a brief video clip of your piloting to us, and we'll offer tips and tricks on how to improve, and potentially run some missions with you as well, if need be. And if you want us to. As well, if you've got any bugs, feel free to let us know. We'll pass those up to the dev team. We'll make sure that they're seen by the appropriate people. They don't like bugs any more than you or I do. If you've got any requests for the RP Corner, feel free to let Artie know. He does take requests, and he might just talk about your topic on air. But for now, folks, all glitches and bugs with TeamSpeak and everything aside, this is the Pilot Review Show reminding you to have your tribbles spayed or neutered. Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah.